The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town of Copper Ridge in the summer of 1887, where dreams came to die and fortunes vanished like mirages in the desert heat. Among the weathered faces and broken spirits wandering the main street was Eleanor Ellie Mae Thompson, a 32-year-old widow whose calloused hands told the story of a woman who had fought tooth and nail against a world determined to crush her spirit. Her husband had died 3 years prior in a mining accident, leaving her with nothing but debts, a ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of town, and a determination that burned brighter than the desert sun itself. If you're enjoying this tale of courage and discovery, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Ellie had tried everything to make ends meet in this unforgiving frontier town. She had taken in washing, mending clothes until her fingers bled, and even worked briefly at the saloon serving drinks to rowdy miners and cowboys, enduring their crude comments and wandering hands just to put food on her table. But nothing seemed to provide the stability she desperately needed. The other townspeople looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. A woman alone was an anomaly in Copper Ridge, something that made the men uncomfortable, and the women whisper behind their fans. The town itself was a testament to broken dreams and faded glory. What had once been a thriving mining community with over 3,000 residents had dwindled to fewer than 400 souls, most of whom were too poor to leave or too stubborn to admit defeat. The main street, once bustling with merchants, banks, and hotels, now featured more boarded-up windows than open businesses. The Silver Dollar Saloon still operated, though its clientele had shifted from wealthy mine owners to desperate men drowning their sorrows in rot-gut whiskey. The general store remained open, but its shelves grew barer each month as supply wagons became increasingly reluctant to make the dangerous journey through Apache territory for such a small, struggling community. Ellie's own situation had grown increasingly desperate over the past few months. Her small savings had dwindled to almost nothing, and the few odd jobs available in town barely covered her basic needs. She had been forced to sell most of her late husband's belongings, including his prized pocket watch and the wedding ring he had saved for months to buy her. The memory of parting with those precious items still brought tears to her eyes during the long, lonely nights in her cabin. On this particular sweltering afternoon, as the heat waves danced off the wooden sidewalks and the few remaining businesses struggled to stay afloat, Sheriff Jameson was conducting yet another auction of abandoned properties. The town had been slowly dying since the main silver mine played out 2 years ago, and now creditors were seizing anything of value to recoup their losses. Ellie stood at the back of the small crowd, her worn cotton dress clinging to her frame, watching as lot after lot sold for pittances to the few remaining residents with any money left. The auction had been going on for over an hour, with various parcels of worthless land and dilapidated buildings changing hands for nominal sums. Old Pete Morrison had bought a collapsed barn for $2, probably planning to salvage the wood for his own repairs. The widow Henderson had purchased a small plot of land for $3, though everyone knew it was too rocky and barren to grow anything substantial. Each transaction felt like another nail in the coffin of Copper Ridge's once bright future. "Next up," Sheriff Jameson called out, his voice hoarse from the heat and dust, mopping his brow with a stained handkerchief. "We have the old Mackenzie well, located about 2 miles northeast of town. Been dry for near on 15 years now, and the property's been abandoned just as long. Previous owner died of consumption back in '72, and his family back east never bothered to claim it. Starting bid is 50 cents. The crowd barely stirred. A dry well in the middle of nowhere was about as useful as a chocolate teapot in this heat. Most folks just shook their heads and fanned themselves with their hats, waiting for something more promising to come up for auction. But something stirred deep in Ellie's chest as she stared at that well. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just the stubborn streak that had kept her alive this long. But she found herself raising her hand. 50 cents, she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a knife through butter. People turned to stare at her, some with amusement, others with the kind of look you'd give someone who'd clearly lost their mind to the desert heat. According to the documents Ellie found, James Mackenzie had been far more than just another prospector trying his luck in the Arizona territory. He had been a trained geologist and surveyor who had spent years methodically mapping the underground mineral deposits throughout the region. His surveys had revealed the existence of multiple silver veins that were far richer and more extensive than anything that had been discovered during the original mining boom. The main mine that had made Copper Ridge famous had only scratched the surface of the area's true mineral wealth. Mackenzie's notes revealed a fascinating and tragic story. He had discovered these rich deposits in 1871, but before he could file the proper claims or begin extraction, he had contracted tuberculosis. Knowing that he was dying, and fearing that his discovery would fall into the wrong hands, he had hidden his findings in the secret chamber behind his well. His plan had been to recover when his health improved, and then return to claim his fortune, but the disease had progressed too quickly. He had died alone in his cabin in 1872, taking the secret of the hidden treasure to his grave. The maps were incredibly detailed, showing not only the location of the silver deposits, but also the best methods for extraction and the estimated value of each site. According to Mackenzie's calculations, the total value of the undiscovered silver in the area was worth more than $3 million, an astronomical sum that would make whoever controlled these claims one of the wealthiest individuals in the entire territory. The documents also included correspondence with mining engineers and investors back east, proving that Mackenzie had been preparing to launch a major mining operation before his untimely death. As Ellie studied the papers by torchlight in the hidden chamber, she began to understand the full magnitude of her discovery. She wasn't just looking at a collection of valuable objects. She was holding the key to revitalizing the entire town of Copper Ridge and potentially changing the course of her own life forever. But she also realized that this knowledge came with enormous risks. If word of her discovery got out before she could properly secure her claims, she could easily find herself the target of claim jumpers, thieves, and unscrupulous businessmen who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to take what she had found. The immediate challenge was figuring out how to transport the treasure and documents back to town without attracting attention. The gold and silver alone weighed several hundred pounds, far more than she could carry in multiple trips. She needed help, but she also needed to be extremely careful about who she trusted. In a town full of desperate people, news of a major treasure discovery would spread like wildfire, and Ellie knew that her life could be in danger if the wrong people learned what she had found. Over the next several days, Ellie developed a careful plan. She would remove the treasure in small amounts, hiding it in various locations around her property, until she could figure out the best way to convert it into usable funds. The documents were the most important items. They were her proof of ownership and the key to the larger fortune that lay buried beneath the desert. She wrapped them carefully in oiled cloth and hid them in a secret compartment she created beneath the floorboards of her cabin. The process of moving the treasure was exhausting and nerve-wracking. Each trip to the well required her to be constantly alert for other people who might be watching or following her. She varied her routes and timing, sometimes going before dawn, other times waiting until late afternoon when the heat would discourage casual travelers. She told anyone who asked that she was trying to restore the well for her own use, a story that seemed plausible enough to avoid suspicion. During this time, Ellie also began to research the legal aspects of her situation. She visited the Territorial Land Office in the county seat, a 2-day ride from Copper Ridge, and carefully studied the records related to mining claims and property ownership. What she discovered was both encouraging and concerning. Mackenzie's original property deed was legitimate, and since she had purchased the well and surrounding land at a legal auction, she had clear title to the property. However, the mining claims that Mackenzie had planned to file had never been officially recorded, which meant that the mineral rights were still available to whoever filed first. This revelation added urgency to Ellie's situation. She needed to file the mining claims as quickly as possible, but doing so would require her to reveal at least some information about what she had discovered. The filing fees alone would cost more money than she currently had available, and she would need to provide detailed surveys and geological reports to support her claims. All of this would take time and resources that she didn't possess, and every day of delay increased the risk that someone else might stumble upon the same information. The stress of keeping such an enormous secret was beginning to take its toll on Ellie. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds and lying awake at night worrying about what would happen if her discovery was revealed prematurely. The weight of the knowledge was almost as heavy as the treasure itself, and she began to understand why Mackenzie had been so secretive about his findings. The burden of such wealth was far greater than she had ever imagined. As she continued to study Mackenzie's documents, Ellie also learned more about the man himself and the circumstances that had led to his tragic end. His personal journal, which had been stored with the other papers, revealed a lonely and increasingly paranoid individual who had become convinced that others were trying to steal his discoveries. He had written about strange visitors to his property, mysterious accidents that had befallen other prospectors in the area, and his growing fear that powerful interests were working to suppress information about the true extent of the region's mineral wealth. The paranoia in Mackenzie's journal entries proved to be more than just the ravings of a sick man when Ellie began to notice that she was being watched. It started subtly, a figure on horseback visible in the distance when she made her trips to the well, the same face appearing in town on multiple occasions when she went to buy supplies, and questions from neighbors about her sudden interest in the abandoned property. At first, she dismissed these observations as products of her own anxiety, but as the pattern continued, she realized that someone had indeed taken notice of her activities. The situation came to a head on a Tuesday morning in late August, when Ellie arrived at the well to find that someone had been there before her. The debris she had carefully arranged to camouflage the entrance to the hidden chamber had been disturbed, and there were fresh boot prints in the dust around the well opening. Her heart raced as she realized that her secret was no longer safe. Someone else knew about the treasure, and they were clearly watching her movements to learn more about what she had discovered. Ellie's worst fears were confirmed when she descended into the well and found that several of the smaller containers of gold coins were missing from the hidden chamber. Whoever had been there had taken only a small portion of the treasure, probably as much as they could carry easily, but they had left behind clear evidence that they knew exactly what they were looking for. More ominously, they had also disturbed the area where she had hidden Mackenzie's documents, though fortunately, she had moved those to her cabin days earlier. The theft forced Ellie to accelerate her plans dramatically. She could no longer afford to move the treasure gradually or wait to file her mining claims through official channels. She needed to act quickly and decisively, even if it meant taking significant risks. That evening, she made a decision that would change everything. She would approach the one person in Copper Ridge who might have the resources and connections to help her, despite the dangers involved. Thomas Brennan was the town's most successful remaining businessman, owner of the general store and several other properties. He was also rumored to have connections with investors and mining companies throughout the territory. Ellie had always been wary of Brennan, who had a reputation for sharp dealing and questionable ethics, but she was running out of options. If she was going to protect her discovery and turn it into legitimate wealth, she needed someone with experience in the mining business and access to capital. The meeting took place in Brennan's office above the general store, late on a Wednesday evening, when the streets were empty and their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Ellie had brought a small sample of the treasure, a few gold coins and one of Mackenzie's survey maps, as proof of what she had discovered. Brennan's reaction was everything she had hoped for and feared. His eyes lit up with greed and excitement, but she could also see the calculating look of a man who was already figuring out how to take advantage of the situation. "Mrs. Thompson," Brennan said, examining the gold coins with a jeweler's loupe. "This is quite remarkable. These coins are genuine, and if you have more where these came from, we're talking about a very substantial sum indeed. But I have to ask, are you certain you have legal claim to this treasure? The last thing either of us wants is to get involved in something that could bring the territorial authorities down on our heads." Ellie explained her purchase of the well property and showed him copies of the relevant documents, carefully avoiding any mention of the mining claims or the full extent of Mackenzie's discoveries. Brennan listened intently, asking pointed questions about the location of the treasure and the circumstances of her discovery. She could see his mind working, evaluating the risks and potential profits of getting involved in her situation. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Thompson," Brennan finally said. "What you've found could indeed be worth a great deal of money, but converting it into usable funds without attracting unwanted attention will require careful planning and significant resources. I can help you with that, but I'll need to be a full partner in this venture. 50-50 split of everything, and I handle all the business arrangements and legal matters." The offer was both generous and exploitative. Brennan was offering to solve her immediate problems and provide the expertise she lacked, but he was also demanding half of a treasure that she had discovered and legally owned. Ellie knew that she had little choice. Without his help, she risked losing everything to claim jumpers or being unable to convert her discovery into actual wealth. But she also knew that once Brennan became involved, she would be dependent on his honesty and goodwill, qualities that were not his strongest attributes. "I need some time to think about your offer, Mr. Brennan," Ellie said, gathering up her samples and documents. "This is a big decision, and I want to make sure I understand all the implications before I commit to anything." Brennan's smile was cold and calculating. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson, but I wouldn't wait too long if I were you. Word has a way of getting around in a small town like this, and if other people learn about your discovery, you might find yourself with more partners than you bargained for, and not all of them as reasonable as I am." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Brennan was telling her that he already knew more about her situation than she had revealed, and that her options were limited. As Ellie walked home through the dark streets of Copper Ridge, she realized that she had reached the point of no return. Whatever decision she made in the next few days would determine not only her financial future, but possibly her survival in this harsh and unforgiving frontier town. The next morning brought both resolution and redemption in ways that Ellie could never have anticipated. As she sat in her cabin, wrestling with the decision about Brennan's partnership offer, she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching her property. Her heart sank as she peered through the window and saw Sheriff Jameson riding up with two other men she didn't recognize, both wearing the badges of territorial marshals. For a moment she feared that Brennan had betrayed her and reported her discovery to the authorities, but the sheriff's expression was grim rather than accusatory. "Mrs. Thompson," Sheriff Jameson called out as he dismounted, "we need to speak with you about some recent developments in town. May we come in?" The formality of his request and the presence of the territorial marshals suggested that something significant had happened, something that went far beyond her personal situation. The marshals introduced themselves as investigators who had been tracking a gang of claim jumpers and thieves who had been operating throughout the territory for several months. Their investigation had led them to Copper Ridge, where they had been monitoring suspicious activities and gathering evidence. What they told Ellie next shocked her to her core. Thomas Brennan was not just a sharp businessman, but the leader of a criminal organization that had been systematically stealing mining claims and treasure from legitimate prospectors throughout Arizona and New Mexico. "We've been watching Brennan for weeks," Marshal Davidson explained, "and we know that he's been pressuring you about some kind of discovery you made. We also know that someone has been stealing from your property, and we believe it was members of Brennan's gang testing to see what you had found. We're here to offer you protection and to ask for your cooperation in bringing these criminals to justice." The revelation that her instincts about Brennan had been correct was both vindicating and terrifying. If she had accepted his partnership offer, she would have essentially handed over her discovery to a criminal organization that would have stolen everything and possibly killed her to eliminate any witnesses. The marshals explained that they had evidence of at least a dozen similar cases where Brennan's gang had cheated or murdered prospectors who had made significant discoveries. With the protection of federal law enforcement, Ellie was finally able to reveal the full extent of her discovery. She showed the marshals Mackenzie's documents and led them to the hidden chamber behind the well, where they were amazed by the treasure that remained. More importantly, the mining surveys and geological reports provided evidence of mineral wealth that could transform the entire region's economy. The marshals assured her that her legal claim to both the treasure and the mining rights was solid, and they would help her navigate the complex process of filing the necessary claims and converting her discovery into legitimate wealth. The arrest of Brennan and his associates created a sensation throughout Copper Ridge and the surrounding territory. The general store owner, who had seemed so respectable, was revealed to be a criminal mastermind who had been systematically looting the region's mineral wealth for his own benefit. The territorial newspapers picked up the story, and Ellie found herself famous as the brave widow who had helped bring down a dangerous criminal organization. But the real transformation came in the months that followed, as Ellie's mining claims were processed and the first new silver mines began operation. The geological surveys that Mackenzie had prepared proved to be remarkably accurate, and the silver deposits were even richer than his estimates had suggested. Within 6 months, Copper Ridge was experiencing a new boom that dwarfed the original mining rush of the 1860s. New businesses opened, families moved back to the area, and the town that had been dying was suddenly thriving again. Ellie used her newfound wealth wisely, investing in the community that had been her home during the darkest period of her life. She funded the construction of a new school, a hospital, and a library, ensuring that Copper Ridge would have the infrastructure needed to sustain its growth. She also established a fund to help other widows and struggling families, remembering her own desperate circumstances and wanting to ensure that no one else would have to face such hardship alone. The 50-cent investment that had seemed like folly to everyone in town had transformed not only Ellie's life, but the entire community. She had proven that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for someone with the courage and determination to look beyond the surface. Her story became legend throughout the territory, inspiring other prospectors and entrepreneurs to take risks and pursue their dreams, no matter how impossible they might seem. As Ellie stood on the porch of her new house overlooking the bustling town of Copper Ridge, she often thought about James Mackenzie and the tragic circumstances that had led to his treasure being hidden for so many years. She had arranged for a proper headstone to be placed on his grave, honoring the man whose careful work and foresight had made her fortune possible. In a way, she felt that she was fulfilling his original vision for the area, bringing prosperity and opportunity to a place that had known too much hardship and disappointment. The well that had started it all still stood on her property, but now it was surrounded by the bustling activity of the most productive silver mine in the territory. Ellie had kept the hidden chamber as a reminder of how dramatically life could change when you had the courage to take a chance on something that everyone else had given up on. Sometimes, she reflected, the most valuable discoveries come not from following the crowd, but from having the wisdom to see potential where others see only problems. Sheriff Jameson looked around the crowd, waiting for any other bids, but the silence stretched on like the endless desert horizon. Going once, going twice, going. Sold to Mrs. Thompson for 50 cents. He banged his gavel with a finality that seemed to echo through the dusty street. Several people chuckled and shook their heads as they dispersed, muttering about fool women and throwing good money after bad. But Ellie felt a strange sense of satisfaction as she walked up to pay her 50 cents and collect the deed to what everyone else considered a worthless piece of desert real estate. The next morning, as the first pale light of dawn crept over the mountains, Ellie set out for her new property with nothing but a canteen of water, some basic tools, and a determination that had carried her through 3 years of widowhood. The 2-mile walk through the scrubland was treacherous, with rattlesnakes sunning themselves on rocks and scorpions scuttling between the sparse vegetation. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, dotted with sagebrush, prickly pear cactus, and the occasional stunted mesquite tree that somehow managed to survive in this arid wasteland. When she finally reached the well, Ellie's heart sank momentarily. The structure was in worse condition than she had imagined. The wooden frame had partially collapsed, weathered gray by years of exposure to the elements. Tumbleweeds had gathered around the base, and the rope and bucket had long since rotted away or been stolen. The surrounding area was littered with debris, broken bottles, rusted tin cans, and the scattered bones of some long-dead animal that had probably fallen in and never made it out. But as Ellie approached the well and peered down into its depths, something caught her eye. The morning sun was hitting the interior at just the right angle, and she could see that the well wasn't completely dry as everyone had assumed. There was a glimmer of water far below, perhaps 30 feet down, reflecting the light like a mirror. More intriguingly, there seemed to be something else down there, something that didn't belong in an ordinary water well. Ellie spent the rest of that first day clearing away the debris and examining the well more carefully. She fashioned a makeshift torch from some dry brush and lowered it down on a length of rope she had brought from town. What she saw in the flickering light made her heart race with excitement and disbelief. The walls of the well were lined with what appeared to be natural rock formations, but there were also clear signs of human modification, carved symbols and markings that suggested this well had been much more than a simple source of water. As the days passed, Ellie became obsessed with her discovery. She returned to the well each morning, bringing better equipment and supplies. She had managed to acquire a proper rope and pulley system from the general store, telling the curious shopkeeper that she was planning to restore the well for her own use. The truth was far more exciting and potentially dangerous. She was beginning to suspect that she had stumbled upon something that had been lost for decades, something that might explain why the original owner had been so secretive about his property. The carved symbols on the well walls were unlike anything Ellie had ever seen. They weren't Native American petroglyphs, which she was familiar with from her years in the territory. These markings seemed more deliberate, more purposeful, as if they were meant to convey specific information to someone who knew how to read them. Some appeared to be directional indicators, while others looked like they might be measurements or quantities. The more she studied them, the more convinced she became that this well had been used as some kind of hiding place or storage facility. On her 5th day of exploration, Ellie made a discovery that changed everything. While examining the eastern wall of the well more closely, She noticed that one section of stone seemed different from the rest. It was slightly discolored and appeared to have been fitted into place, rather than being part of the original construction. When she pressed against it with her tools, it shifted slightly, revealing that it was actually a carefully concealed entrance to a hidden chamber behind the well wall. Working carefully with a small pickaxe and chisel, Ellie managed to remove several stones and create an opening large enough to squeeze through. Her heart pounded as she lit her torch and crawled into the hidden space, not knowing what she might find in the darkness beyond. The chamber was larger than she had expected, roughly the size of a small room, with a ceiling high enough for her to stand upright. The air was stale but breathable, and the walls were lined with wooden shelves and metal containers that had somehow survived the decades in this dry, protected environment. As Ellie's torchlight played across the contents of the hidden chamber, she realized that she had discovered something far more valuable than a simple water source. The shelves were lined with leather pouches, wooden boxes, and metal containers of various sizes. When she opened the first pouch with trembling hands, gold coins spilled out onto the floor, glinting in the torchlight like fallen stars. The second container held silver bars, each one stamped with markings that indicated their purity and weight. A third box contained precious gems, emeralds, rubies, and diamonds that sparkled with an inner fire that took her breath away. But the most significant discovery was yet to come. In the back corner of the chamber, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and stored in a waterproof metal box, Ellie found a collection of documents that would prove to be worth more than all the gold and silver combined. These were the original survey maps and mining claims for the entire Copper Ridge area, including detailed information about silver deposits that had never been discovered or exploited. The papers bore the signature of James Mackenzie, the original owner of the well, and told the story of a man who had made the discovery of a lifetime, but had died before he could act on his knowledge.